Hello again, and welcome back to another edition of Time Warner's Week in Review, public policy talk on the issues in our lives and the news of the week. I'm your host, Bob Jimenez, and if you're suffering your 19th nervous breakdown, and late for your psychiatric appointment, stay with us for about an hour because we've got your back. This hour, we're going to talk about independent voters. They are launching or introducing their agenda for new political reform, and they are challenging every other candidate to endorse them. Joe Lieberman's listening. His philosophy these days, if you can't beat him, join him. All right, let's get to work. Our first not our first panelist, but our first guest is Jim Mangia, co-chair, independentvoice.org. Jim, always good to see you back.
Thank you.
Let's get this Lieberman thing out of the way. Lieberman loses the primary, war candidate. Voters reject him. Later he pops up and he says, you can't get rid of me that easy. I'm going to go to independents and run in the runoff. Mm-hmm. First of all, what do you think of that? Because this guy's a war candidate. Independents don't necessarily support the war.
Correct. Actually, two-thirds of the independents who voted in Connecticut's open primary voted against Lieberman. So it's a real travesty that he would then use the independent line to project himself. I mean, the real issue is the thing that Lieberman believes in is not independent politics. He believes in keeping his own job, and that's what this is all about.
So what are his chances of actually doing it, or do you think he's going to see the light and say, nah, this isn't wise?
Well, no, I don't think he's going to see the light as not wise because he's interested in keeping his job. But I do think that, the support of the Republican Party is going to be key in whether he keeps his seat or not. And I think that independents are going to vote for Lamont as they did in the primary. So he's really not an independent.
Are you lobbying openly against his running as an independent?
Yes, certainly am.
So you're going to fight against it?
Yes.
All the way from California?
It's a travesty.
All right. Let's talk about independent voters. They have doubled in their number, I think, since 1990. You now comprise, 3.6 million independent voters. Still a small number when you consider all the other voters in the state, but significant enough where you could affect the outcome of an election, namely the governor's race.
Exactly. 24% of California voters are now independent, and we're the only grouping of voters who are growing in our numbers while the Democrats and Republicans are declining. I think the importance to the governor's race is the thing that unites independents. I mean, we kind of span the political spectrum on ideological issues and hot-button issues. But I think what we all agree on is radical democratic reform, political reform. Mm-hmm. And as you notice in the last couple of weeks, both Schwarzenegger and Angelides are tripping over themselves to kind of project as the candidate of reform, which is obviously a direct result of our efforts. But I think that it's very, very important to understand that independents are going to be the determining vote, the determining factor in this election. And we'll see how the gubernatorial candidates reach out to independentvoice.org and to independent voters specifically to include them as part of their coalition moving forward.
Okay, but all sides are talking about reform. What's your reform plan, and how is it different from the others?
Well, nobody's really instituting reform. I mean, yes, you'll get career politicians that get up there and talk about, we're going to enact redistricting reform, but then, of course, what you see is the maneuverings we saw last week where they basically didn't.
And they're promising next year to revisit it.
Yeah, of course.
How much can you believe that?
Sure they are.
Yeah.
We'll see what happens after the election.
Okay.
But the bottom line is, will career politicians, self-interested career politicians, give over their power to the Democratic population? And they won't.
What's your first reform?
Redistricting reform is a critical reform because you can't have self-interested legislators drawing their own districts. Mm-hmm. It's like having the lions watch the hen house. You just can't do it.
How did the independents vote on Prop 77? You have numbers on that?
Independents supported it. However, what was clear was independents were disgusted with the partisanship that surrounded it. So you had a situation where Governor Schwarzenegger included, unfortunately, Prop 77 as part of a whole host of what he called reforms, which were actually his partisan moves against the unions and elements of the Democratic Party. So then the Democrats had to naturally oppose it. So what would have been a fabulous reform became a political football in the typical partisan infighting that goes on in Sacramento and in Washington. So independents were very disturbed about that and for the most part stayed home.
Do independents still feel like second-class citizens most of the time?
Of course. Can't vote in the primaries. Can't vote in, you have no power within the district. The issue is that we've got to assert our power. That's what independentvoice.org is about. We're about asserting the power of independent voters and beginning to influence the process as a constituency to be reckoned with.
How much ground are you gaining in the Latino community, for example?
Latinos are the largest registrants,
that are
the largest.
non-declared?
Yes.
Okay.
It's growing significantly in the Latino community. So you have a situation where the Republicans have kind of alienated the Latino community. The Democrats take the Latino community for granted, and what you're seeing is an explosion of independent voters in the Latino community, which is very significant.
I have a question. Have you gotten the audience, so to speak, your group, with Governor Schwarzenegger or with Angelides?
We are in conversation informally and formally with the candidates, and we are beginning to put pressure on them to get a formal audience. I think that the issue is they're listening to us, and the issue is that independents are going to decide the election. So we'll see how they play it. I mean, we've started a process in which we've sent out a questionnaire to the candidates, which they'll get back to us next week, in which they lay out their plan for reaching out to independents, their support or non-support for political reform, and then we see how they respond, and then we start the meetings and really have a conversation with them.
I think a lot of this stuff doesn't even happen without redistricting, and because then there's apathy by any of the career politicians to address any individual issues. What's the push to see that solution, to come to a solution with that, to rise redistricting again, basically?
I think that there are forces within the state, including independentvoice.org, who would support another initiative if necessary, and I think that's the threat.
There are a number of reform issues that are winning, but it just seems to me that redistricting was totally missed as one of the most important issues to be dealt with in this state. Because if I'm a career politician sitting fat, dumb, and happy, and I don't care what happens to anything but whatever I believe in, and if that major issue couldn't be taken advantage of in a 23% turnout, what does that say for reform politics?
Well, again, you win some and you lose some. I mean, we're in a battle, and this is a battlefield. And the fact is we've won more than we've lost as far as political reforms over the last 15 years. So yes, we lost the last one. We lost Prop 77, but there's going to be more, and we're going to continue to fight forward. But again, yeah, you win some and you lose some.
I think what TQ is referring to, though, is something that we have acknowledged on this program, and that is voter fatigue. We were called out to the polls so many times. We're so overwhelmed by these ads and the battling that went on. We're tired of it. What I find fascinating about what you're trying to do is you're really trying to lead from the middle. You've got dissonant types coming from the left and the right to a collective middle saying we're dissatisfied with both sides. Now, how do you lead from the middle until you define certain parts, the bow of that ship? And what I'm hearing you say is we're going to talk to the candidates about what we value, and then I guess they're going to define what matters from their perspective. You know?
Well, I think we're going to define what it means to reach out to independents and to include us as a key part of their coalition. And that's what the fight is about, whether they will or not. But I think, yes, we are a left, center, right coalition in a sense, and I think that's a strength. But again, the leadership of the independent movement is moving it in a particular direction that I think is going to have a profound impact on our political structure.
I've never heard voter fatigue before. That's very interesting. We've got too much democracy in this town. We have to stop. Jim Mangia, thanks very much for coming by. I really appreciate you coming, and I vote you, the second dressed man on the left-hand side of your screen. Jim.